The Galactic Scientific Authority thought they'd captured a simple human specimen for study. They were wrong. Commander Jack Vega didn't just wake up in their lab. He'd been waiting for this moment for years. His first words in perfect galactic standard shattered their assumptions. You grabbed the wrong human. The GSA scientists logged the new specimen with routine precision. Their previous captures had been simple biological samples, curious but passive creatures who'd spent their time studying their surroundings with wide-eyed wonder. Number 5, they assumed, was just like the others. Their full-spectrum scanners had confirmed standard human physiology. No anomalous energy signatures, no integrated weaponry, just the kind of fragile carbon-based life they'd come to expect. They cataloged him as another example of human curiosity, another soft specimen to observe. Their containment measures reflected that assumption. The energy field around him was calibrated for inquisitive primates, strong enough to hold a creature that might test its limits with its hands or throw its body against the barrier. It was never meant to restrain a trained combat operative. Their protocols were born from 15,000 years of unchallenged scientific dominance, an institutional arrogance that blinded them to the possibility of strategic deception. It never crossed their minds that humans might possess not just curiosity, but advanced counterintelligence operations. They'd grown used to being the sole masters of interstellar observation. They noted the human's calm posture, his steady breathing, the way his eyes scanned the room without panic. They interpreted it as the disoriented awareness of a newly awakened test subject. They recorded his lack of movement as a sign of primitive shock. Everything in their data logs pointed toward a predictable, manageable encounter. They felt the quiet confidence that came from controlling every variable in the room, the environment, the containment, the subject. All they saw was another entry in their files. Then the human spoke. His words didn't stumble from his mouth like a first attempt at language. They came out clean and precise in flawless galactic standard, without the guttural roughness of a novice. He didn't ask where he was. He didn't express confusion or fear. He simply stated a fact, his voice carrying an authority that didn't belong to a captive. You grabbed the wrong human. The clinical silence of the lab fractured. Instruments continued to hum. Lights still glowed, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. The detached curiosity of the observers curdled into something colder. They weren't looking at a specimen anymore. They were looking at a problem, and for the first time in millennia they knew, with a sudden, heavy certainty, that they were not in control. The first shock wasn't physical, it was linguistic. Researchers had their translation matrices active, prepared to decode primitive human vocalizations into meaningful data. They expected grunts, confused gestures, maybe some crude attempts at communication. Standard first contact procedure for a species they considered barely space-aware. Vega spoke with the polished accent of a high-ranking diplomat from the core systems. His enunciation carried the subtle tonal inflections of someone who'd trained with native speakers, not learned from recordings. The words didn't just convey meaning, they carried cultural nuance, implied status, communicated authority. He didn't ask simple questions. He used technical terms from their own engineering manuals, referenced GSA protocols by their official designation codes, quoted regulation passages verbatim. The lead linguist checked her equipment 3 times, convinced there was a feedback error. The junior assistant, Tesar, watched the human's lips move in perfect sync with the translated audio. No delay, no accent marker, no syntactic stumble. This wasn't language acquisition through observation. This was deep infiltration, the kind of linguistic mastery that took years of immersion or advanced intelligence penetration. Their translation systems weren't just unnecessary. They were suddenly redundant, like bringing a candle to a star. Tissar's console showed 0 processing load. The human's speech required no interpretation, no algorithmic adjustment. Every syllable matched galactic standard with unnerving precision. The implications began to dawn on the research team. Their subject hadn't learned their language from inside the containment field. He'd arrived already fluent. Their entire communication strategy, built around controlling information flow through translation filters, became instantly obsolete. Vega watched their realization with calm assessment. He saw the lead scientist tapping urgently at her console, the security chief checking his sidearm, the junior assistant staring with dawning horror. He waited exactly 3 seconds before delivering the confirmation. Earth cracked your linguistic structures 42 months ago. We've been monitoring standard GSA comm channels ever since. The communication barrier, that fundamental advantage every advanced species held over newly contacted civilizations, vanished. Their captive understood every word they said among themselves, every technical term in their manuals, every protocol designation. They could no longer speak freely in his presence. Every discussion about containment procedures, every research note, every private observation became potential intelligence for the subject they were supposed to be studying. The researchers instinctively lowered their voices, though they knew it was pointless. They exchanged glances instead of words. The comfortable assumption of linguistic superiority, that they could discuss their subject freely in his presence, evaporated. Their own language, the foundation of their scientific communication, had been turned against them. They stood in silence, realizing they were the ones now struggling with a communication gap. Vega had not just entered their lab. He had already colonized their means of understanding. The researchers expected panic. They'd seen it before. The frantic scrabbling at containment fields, the wild-eyed confusion, the primitive aggression born of fear. They had protocols for that. What they didn't have protocols for was the unnerving stillness of Commander Vega. His calm was more terrifying than any weapon. He didn't waste energy on futile struggle. He stood centered, his posture relaxed but ready, his eyes systematically scanning the environment. He wasn't looking at them as captors. He was reading the room. His gaze paused on the juncture where the energy field met the ceiling emitter, noting the slight shimmer that indicated a harmonic flux. He studied the structural ribs of the containment chamber, his eyes tracing the load-bearing points. He noted the placement of every console, the distance to the nearest exit, the thickness of the viewport glass. This wasn't the disoriented observation of a captured animal. This was a tactical survey. His breathing was the most disturbing detail. Their bioscanners picked it up, a perfect rhythmic pattern consistent with advanced meditative focus techniques used by elite military units across known space. His heart rate remained steady at 52 beats per minute. His cortisol levels were lower than the scientists monitoring him. There was no spike of adrenaline, no sign of the fight-or-flight response they'd documented in every other species they'd ever captured. The data scrolling across their screens described a man in a state of deep, controlled readiness. He wasn't afraid. He was working. The security chief finally recognized the behavior pattern. It wasn't in any of their xenopsychology databases. It was in classified briefings about special operations infiltration protocols, the methodical environmental assessment, the target prioritization, the physiological control. This was a professional evaluating a hostile environment for weaknesses and opportunities. Their specimen wasn't waiting to be studied. He was conducting a threat assessment on his captors. The realization hit the research team like a physical blow. They were no longer the observers. They were the subjects of his analysis. Vega confirmed it without being asked. He turned his head slightly toward the primary observation window, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. Standard operating procedure for captured personnel. Situational assessment comes before action. You have 3 structural weaknesses in this chamber. Your field emitter is cycling on a predictable frequency, and your head of security is standing too close to the conduit junction. The head of security instinctively took a step back, then flushed with embarrassment. Vega had just demonstrated his point more effectively than any explanation. Their containment procedures, their security posture, their entire setup, it was all being itemized and filed away in a tactical report they would never see. The man in the cage was writing the after-action report in his head, and they were the operational failures. The containment field was their pride. The GSA had used this same model for centuries without a single breach. It was their ultimate guarantee of control, their answer to any potential threat from unknown species. The energy barrier hummed with the confidence of 15,000 years of unchallenged technological dominance. It was the one thing in the room they never doubted. Vega approached it without hesitation. He didn't test it with a cautious finger or recoil from its warning shimmer. He placed his bare palm flat against the energy field as if touching glass. The researchers expected the automatic defensive response, the painful feedback surge that taught captives to keep their distance. Instead, The field rippled under his hand like disturbed water. The solid wall of light became fluid, unstable. He spoke calmly while maintaining contact. Your field operates on a fixed harmonic frequency. Predictable, easy to map if you know the algorithm. His nano countermeasures had been active since he woke, microscopic systems analyzing and adapting to the field's energy signature. They weren't trying to overpower it. They were synchronizing with it, finding the precise resonance that would allow safe passage. The field's stability relied on perfect harmonic isolation, a concept the GSA considered unbreakable. The researchers watched their main view screen as the containment field's integrity readings began to fluctuate. The energy matrix showed strange coherence losses at the molecular level. It wasn't a brute force attack. It was a precise surgical procedure performed on energy itself. The field flickered where Vega's hand made contact, the light bending around his fingers as if inviting him through. Security teams raised their weapons but held their fire. Protocol demanded non-lethal containment first. They watched in disbelief as the solid barrier became translucent, then almost transparent around the human's form. He was stepping through it. Not bursting through, not breaking through, simply walking through as if the field had become a curtain. He passed completely through the energy barrier. The field stabilized immediately behind him, returning to its full strength and solid appearance. It stood there, perfectly intact, humming with the same steady power as before. It had done its job perfectly, containing nothing but empty space. Their ultimate defense had been reduced to a temporary inconvenience, a door he'd politely closed behind himself. Vega stood free in the main laboratory. He didn't look triumphant. He looked like a man who just confirmed a hypothesis. The containment field remained active, a monument to their overconfidence. They'd invested everything in a system designed to handle threats they understood. They never considered someone might not fight their technology, but simply understand it better than they did. Their strongest security measure had become their greatest vulnerability because they forgot the oldest rule of defense. Anything that can be built can be taken apart. The GSA operated on a simple principle. Their technological edge was absolute. Their stealth systems could mask an entire battle group from any known sensor array. Their encryption algorithms were considered unbreakable by species that had been spacefaring for millennia. They built their entire strategy around this assumed superiority, this unshakable confidence that they saw further, moved quieter, and calculated faster than anyone else in the galaxy. Their research vessel, the Starseeker, was a testament to this belief. A floating fortress of advanced science they considered invisible and impenetrable. Vega didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He simply stated a fact that unraveled their entire technological doctrine. We cracked your primary stealth harmonics 26 standard months ago. Your signature masking protocol has a predictable decay rhythm in high-energy environments. He might as well have told them their front door had been unlocked for 2 years. The lead engineer checked the diagnostic logs, her hands moving with a sudden nervous energy. She found the anomaly immediately. A tiny, consistent pattern in the stealth field's energy output that shouldn't have been there. A pattern human sensors had apparently been tracking for years. The revelation hit like a series of body blows. Their communication encryption, reverse engineered 18 months prior. Their shield modulation frequencies, mapped and countered. Their propulsion signatures, cataloged and identifiable across 12 light-years. Human science hadn't been trying to match GSA technology. They'd been taking it apart from a distance, studying its weaknesses, building countermeasures for systems the GSA considered inviolable. The intelligence gap wasn't measured in months. It was measured in years. Every piece of advanced technology on the ship, every system they relied on for safety and control, was already compromised. The Starseeker wasn't a stealth vessel. It was a floating classroom, and humanity had been taking detailed notes. The ship's internal sensors confirmed it. Vega issued a command in flawless technical dialect, a string of code that shouldn't have been possible for an outsider to know. The main environmental control console accepted it without hesitation. The lighting in the corridor shifted to a slightly warmer spectrum. The hum of the life support systems altered its pitch. The ship recognized his authority. His voice commands carried the same weight as a senior GSA officer's. Their own vessel was listening to him. Then he demonstrated the full extent of the compromise. He didn't touch a single control panel. He spoke a series of authorization codes that should have been known only to the ship's captain and chief engineer. The security doors to the bridge cycled open. The primary communications array powered up on a frequency reserved for emergency fleet-wide alerts. The defensive turret systems aboard the Starseeker went from standby to active targeting, but their sensors weren't scanning outward for threats. They were tracking the movements of the GSA security teams inside the ship. Their own weapons systems were acquiring targets among their crew. The GSA officers stood frozen, watching their control panels light up with activity they hadn't ordered. Warning glyphs flashed as system after system reported new command inputs from an unknown source. The ship was responding to two masters, and one of them was the man they'd captured. Their technology, their pride, their guarantee of safety, it was all answering to the enemy. The Starseeker hadn't been infiltrated. It had been reprogrammed for a new owner, and the transfer of command happened without a single shot being fired. Their advantage hadn't just been neutralized, it had been conscripted. The first detonation shook the Starseeker's hull precisely as Vega stepped through the containment field. Director Kazult, monitoring from the bridge, assumed the two events were connected, a desperate act by a single escaped captive. He ordered standard containment procedures, his voice tight but controlled. He believed he was dealing with a localized problem, a rogue specimen causing limited damage. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, initiating lockdown protocols for the science wing. They'd trained for this. One escaped subject was a manageable scenario. Then the second explosion echoed from the opposite end of the ship, near engineering. A third followed instantly from the portside cargo bay. The reports flooded the bridge comms, a chorus of confusion from security teams across the vessel. They weren't facing a single point of failure. They were under coordinated assault from multiple vectors simultaneously. Security Team Alpha, dispatched to recapture Vega, found their path blocked by emergency bulkheads that slammed shut without warning. The doors weren't responding to their override codes. Team Beta, heading toward the engineering blast, reported the same problem. Corridors sealing against them, trapping them in increasingly isolated sections. The ship's architecture was turning against its own crew. The Starseeker's AI began executing emergency protocols, but not the ones the bridge crew expected. Instead of isolating the human intruder, the system initiated atmosphere containment procedures in areas with no registered threats. It flooded empty corridors with suppressant foam. It powered down non-essential systems in crew quarters while leaving the science wing fully operational. The AI's priority matrix had been altered. It was no longer prioritizing GSA security. Sensor logs showed it was now calculating for minimal human casualties, rerouting power and locking down areas based on a new, unfamiliar set of safety parameters. Their own central intelligence was protecting their attackers. Director Kazult watched his command console light up with dozens of simultaneous alerts. He saw security teams pinned down, vital systems going offline, internal sensors reporting movement patterns that suggested a coordinated force moving through his ship. This wasn't an escape attempt. The scale, the precision, the timing, it was a military operation. A takeover. His research vessel, a place of quiet study and observation, was transforming into a battlefield right under his feet. The realization was a cold weight in his stomach. They hadn't captured a specimen. They'd brought a Trojan horse aboard, and it had just opened its gates. Vega confirmed it without a hint of triumph. He accessed a comm panel in the main lab, his authorization accepted instantly by the compromised ship systems. His voice came over the bridge speakers, calm and clear. Director Kazult, my team is securing the vessel. Stand down your security forces to avoid unnecessary casualties. This concluded 30 seconds ago. The phrasing was deliberate. Not I have a team, my team. Not they are boarding, they are securing. The implication was staggeringly clear. They hadn't just arrived. They'd been here. The GSA hadn't lost control of their ship. They'd never had it. The quiet hum of the Starseeker's engines now sounded like a funeral dirge for their mission. Their floating laboratory, their symbol of peaceful exploration, had become a prize of war. Director Kazult still believed in the narrative of first contact. His team had initiated this encounter, selected the specimen, controlled the circumstances. That assumption formed the bedrock of his understanding. It was about to collapse. Vega didn't look like a man who'd been taken by surprise. He looked like a man whose plan was proceeding exactly on schedule. His capture wasn't an accident. It was an invitation, and the GSA had accepted it without reading the terms. The trap had been meticulously set. Earth's Intelligence Division had spent years studying GSA mission profiles, their scientific curiosity, their patterns of behavior. They knew what kind of human the alien scientist would find most appealing as a specimen. Not a soldier, not a diplomat. A specific profile. Intelligent enough to be interesting, physically unremarkable, possessing a curious and observant nature that would appeal to researchers. Commander Vega had spent 2 years cultivating that exact persona. His background was scrubbed and rebuilt to present the perfect lure. A xenobiologist with a passion for exploration, a perfect candidate for passive study. The GSA's own selection algorithms flagged him as an ideal low-risk acquisition. They never considered the profile might be engineered. Every step of their protocol was anticipated. The passive scans, the containment procedures, the linguistic analysis, human strategists had wargamed the entire sequence. They knew the GSA would use a Class 7 energy field. They knew the researchers would attempt communication through their translation matrix first. They knew the security team would stand at specific posts based on standard vessel layouts. The GSA's celebrated scientific methodology, their pride in systematic observation, made them profoundly predictable. Their entire mission protocol, refined over millennia, became a script that humanity had learned by heart. Vega watched the dawning horror on Director Kazult's face through the bridge monitor. The director was finally connecting the dots. The flawless galactic standard, the immediate systems compromise, the simultaneous breaches across the ship. It wasn't luck. It wasn't improvisation. It was a plan executing with brutal precision. The GSA hadn't stumbled upon a human. They had taken the exact human Earth wanted them to take. Their scientific curiosity had been weaponized against them. They'd followed their own rules straight into an ambush. Vega's confirmation was delivered without emotion. You didn't capture a specimen, Director. You accepted a delivery. My insertion was Phase 1. Your research program provided the cover. Your protocols provided the access. The scope of the deception was staggering. Their vaunted first contact initiative, their proud moment of scientific discovery, had been a controlled operation run by human intelligence. They weren't the hunters. They were the instrument. Their laboratory wasn't a place of study anymore. It was a battlefield where every one of their assumptions had been turned into a vulnerability. Their science had been hijacked, their mission co-opted, and their ship was now the stage for an operation they had unknowingly sponsored from the very beginning. The Starseeker's nervous system now answered to a new master. The GSA crew operated under the fundamental assumption that they controlled every circuit, every door, every environmental setting. That assumption evaporated as Vega moved through the corridors. Bulkheads that should have remained sealed slid open at his approach. Doors designated for senior officers only recognized his command clearance. The ship's architecture, built to confine and control, became a guide leading him exactly where he wanted to go. Environmental systems adjusted without any input from the bridge. The lighting in the hallways shifted to a spectrum optimized for human vision. Atmospheric pressure and oxygen mix altered to match Earth normal conditions. Temperature controls recalibrated to human comfort levels. The ship wasn't just obeying Vega's commands. It was anticipating his preferences, adjusting its entire internal environment to suit its new masters. The GSA crew found themselves breathing air mixed for another species, walking through light that felt slightly off, living in a habitat that was no longer designed for them. Communication channels carried human transmissions with priority clearance. Secure fleet frequencies broadcast status reports from Vega's team in the clear. Internal comms echoed with calm, professional updates between human operatives. The GSA's own attempts to coordinate a response were drowned out or blocked entirely. Their emergency channels returned only static or pre-recorded error messages. Every attempt to re-establish command and control met with digital silence. Their network, their lifeline, their means of understanding what was happening to their ship, now served another purpose entirely: security override codes. The last resort of any GSA officer in a crisis generated polite refusal messages. The system acknowledged the codes as valid, then denied the requests. Authorization insufficient for current operational parameters. The same codes that could unlock weapon systems or initiate self-destruct now produced nothing but error glyphs on every console. The hierarchy of command had been rewritten in the ship's core programming. Their own security protocols designed to prevent exactly this kind of takeover now enforced it. The vessel's architecture became an active ally to the human team. Elevators carried GSA security teams to dead-end maintenance shafts instead of their intended destinations. Surveillance cameras in occupied areas developed unexplained technical faults while providing perfect coverage of GSA movements. Life support stability warnings flashed in areas where humans were operating, ensuring their safety, while similar alerts in GSA-controlled sections were inexplicably delayed or downgraded. The ship was protecting its captors from its rightful crew. Vega explained the mechanism without pride, as if discussing a simple engineering fact. Your core operating system has a backdoor protocol for remote administration. Standard on all GSA vessels. You use it for fleet updates and emergency maintenance. We found it 2 years ago. We've had full administrative access ever since. The revelation was worse than sabotage. Sabotage could be repaired. This was a fundamental redesign of ownership. Their technology hadn't been broken. It had been repurposed. Every system, every circuit, every line of code that made the Starseeker a GSA vessel now answered to human command. Their own creation had switched sides without a single component being replaced. Director Kazult watched Vega's progress on the internal monitors with growing confusion. He expected a desperate sprint for the nearest airlock, a frantic search for escape pods, the panicked flight of a cornered animal. Vega moved with none of that energy. His path through the ship was deliberate, direct, and impossible to mistake. He wasn't heading for an exit. He was moving deeper into the vessel, toward the restricted specimen-holding areas. The realization dawned slowly, then with chilling certainty. This wasn't an escape. The human was going back for the others. Vega's team moved with him in coordinated silence. Security feeds showed small, efficient squads securing intersections and control points without firing a shot. They used the ship's own systems against the remaining GSA personnel, sealing doors to isolate resistance, manipulating environmental controls to discourage pursuit. Their actions were precise, measured, and focused entirely on controlling territory rather than causing destruction. They weren't leaving. They were consolidating. They were taking the ship, room by room, system by system, with the calm authority of a relief force securing a friendly city. The holding area doors cycled open for Vega without resistance. Inside, the 4 previous human specimens watched him enter. They didn't look like frightened civilians. They stood waiting, their postures alert and coordinated. The GSA's records described them as a teacher, a freight pilot, a nurse, and a student. Ordinary people snatched from their lives for study. Their captors had seen curiosity and fear in their eyes. What Vega saw was recognition and readiness. These weren't passive victims waiting for rescue. They were assets awaiting extraction. The GSA security teams finally understood the scale of their miscalculation. They weren't dealing with prisoners. They were facing soldiers operating under deep cover. The previous specimens hadn't been randomly selected. They were part of the operation, placed deliberately to be captured. Their profiles carefully constructed to appear harmless and interesting to GSA scientists. Their time in captivity hadn't been spent in fear. It had been spent gathering intelligence, studying routines, and waiting for the signal. Their scientific subjects had been military operatives the entire time. Vega confirmed it with a simple status check. All units report. The 4 humans responded with crisp, professional updates on their condition and the status of their holding cells. They knew technical details about the ship's systems. They referenced security patrol schedules. They spoke like soldiers debriefing after a mission. The teacher adjusted the fit of her jumpsuit, her movements revealing an athlete's musculature. The student stood with the balanced stance of someone trained in close-quarters combat. Their disguises fell away, leaving only the professionals beneath. The GSA's entire scientific program collapsed into a single, horrifying truth. Their specimens were objectives. Their research was espionage. Their laboratory was a battlefield. They had spent weeks studying these humans, running tests, recording observations, believing they were unlocking the secrets of a new species. The whole time, their subjects had been studying them, learning their patterns, mapping their ship, and waiting for the man they called Commander to come collect them and complete the mission. Their captivity had never been about imprisonment. It had always been about insertion. The rescue wasn't an escape plan. It was an extraction, and the GSA had provided the transportation, the housing, and the security for the entire operation. Director Kazolt held to his justification. His research advanced galactic knowledge. The data gathered could benefit countless species. He believed in the noble lie of science. That understanding sometimes required uncomfortable methods. His people had studied other civilizations for millennia. They'd always maintained a certain distance, a clinical objectivity. He told himself the humans were specimens, not people. A necessary classification for the pursuit of knowledge. Captain Mara Parker entered the main data center with Commander Vega. She didn't look at the director. She faced the central holographic display. Her commands, spoken in clean galactic standard, called up files the GSA had encrypted under the highest security protocols. They weren't tactical readouts or system schematics. They were civilian medical records from Earth. The display populated with faces, names, and lives. A high school biology teacher from Oslo. A commercial freight pilot from the Martian colonies. An emergency room nurse from Singapore. A university linguistics student from Nairobi. Their profiles appeared next to the GSA's clinical designations. Specimen 1, Specimen 2, Specimen 3, Specimen 4. The contrast was brutal. The GSA saw data points. Parker showed them people with families, careers, and homes. The teacher had a wife and 2 children. The pilot was 3 payments from owning his ship outright. The nurse had recently won an award for community service. These were not anonymous test subjects. They were individuals with full lives violently interrupted. Parker called up the experiment logs. The files detailed procedures performed without anesthetic, without consent, without medical necessity. Neural mapping through painful electrical stimulation, genetic sampling that left lasting tissue damage, repeated exposure to radiation and foreign pathogens to measure immune response, isolation stress tests that pushed the mind to its breaking point. Each entry was time-stamped, logged, and approved by the GSA Science Directorate. The stated goal was to understand human physiological limits. The method was systematic, state-sanctioned torture. The Galactic Sentient Rights Accords appeared on another screen. Passages outlining the ethical treatment of captured individuals were highlighted. Rules against non-consensual medical procedures. Protections for civilians. Standards for humane confinement. Parker didn't need to point out the violations. The evidence did it for her. Line by line, the GSA's own research logs contradicted the very agreements they helped draft and enforce. Their scientific curiosity had overridden their ethical framework, and they had documented every transgression in meticulous detail. Parker let the silence hang in the room. The only sound was the hum of the display and the quiet, strained breathing of the GSA officers. Then she accessed the real-time bioscan feeds from the holding cells. Vital signs appeared alongside video of the 4 humans. Elevated heart rates, stress hormones at dangerous levels, signs of sleep deprivation and nutritional deficiency. The teacher was shown clenching his jaw against obvious pain. The student rocked slowly, a documented stress response. This wasn't historical data. This was happening now. Their suffering was a live feed. Director Kazolt looked from the medical scans to the sentient rights treaties, to the faces of the people on the screen. The justification he'd clung to crumbled to dust. This wasn't first contact. This wasn't science. His mission, his life's work, stood exposed as a catalog of war crimes. The data center, once the heart of his research, had become a courtroom. The evidence was his own, and the verdict was written in the pain of the people on the screen. The Varick trading station hung in the silent black, its rotating rings a beacon of neutral ground for 1,000 species. The GSA delegation assumed this would follow standard bureaucratic procedure. They expected drawn-out hearings, procedural delays, diplomatic maneuvering. They believed their 15,000 years of precedent would shield them. Their lawyers prepared for a debate over technicalities and obscure clauses in interstellar law. They were wrong. Earth's delegation arrived without fanfare. Captain Parker and Commander Vega stood before the Galactic Council's holographic assembly. They did not shout. They did not plead. They presented evidence with the cold, clinical precision of surgeons. They began with the Starseeker's own internal logs. Ship security feeds showed the capture of civilians. Audio records captured their pleas ignored by GSA researchers. Technical logs detailed the energy readings of the containment field, the biological scans run without consent. The data was irrefutable because it was their own. The medical scans came next. Holograms of the 4 human civilians materialized above the council chamber. Their bodies were mapped with injury reports, neural stress indicators, and biometric data showing clear signs of systematic torture. The teachers elevated cortisol levels during an experimental procedure. The pilot's tissue damage from aggressive genetic sampling. The council members watched in silence. This was not anecdotal evidence. This was quantifiable harm, logged and time-stamped by the perpetrator's own systems. Then came the civilian testimonies. Recorded messages from family members on Earth appeared. A wife describing her husband's disappearance. Children asking for their father. The holograms showed the human faces, the grief raw and recent. The GSA had classified these people as specimens. Earth presented them as what they were, victims. Each piece of evidence was a brick in a wall, and the GSA's legal team had no tools to dismantle it. Their defenses, built on technicalities and protocol, crumbled against the weight of documented suffering. The Council's neutrality, a cornerstone of galactic politics, began to fracture. The assembled species watched the evidence mount. The Voral delegates, known for their strict ethical codes, turned their massive forms away from the GSA representatives. The insectoid Creval clicked their mandibles in a rhythm that signaled profound disapproval. The chamber, usually a place of calm deliberation, grew heavy with a shared, silent judgment. 15,000 years of precedent offered no protection against this. You cannot appeal to tradition when the evidence shows torture. The head of the council, an elder from a species that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, finally spoke. His voice was not angry. It was heavy with disappointment. He asked the GSA director if he had any rebuttal. The director began to speak about the pursuit of knowledge, the sacrifices required for science. His words sounded hollow and small in the face of the evidence. He was not defending a mission anymore. He was rationalizing a crime. Commander Vega stepped forward.
He did not look at the director.
He addressed the council. His voice was flat, devoid of anger, carrying only the weight of fact. The illegal capture and experimentation on 4 civilian human citizens was not a scientific error. It was an act of war. Our response was measured and precise. We have shown you the truth. The judgment is yours. The silence that followed was absolute. The GSA's scientific expedition, their proud mission of discovery, was over. In its place stood a diplomatic catastrophe of their own making, and there was no protocol to save them from it. The Galactic Council expected screams for blood. They were ready for demands of crippling sanctions, the dismantling of the GSA, the public trial of its directors. Every civilization that reached the stars did so with a certain predictable aggression. Vengeance was a universal language. They braced for humanity to speak it fluently. Captain Mara Parker stepped forward. The silence in the chamber was absolute. She didn't demand punishment. She requested recognition, formal diplomatic status for the human species, with all the rights and protections afforded to spacefaring civilizations. The request was so measured, so procedural, it took a moment for the council to process it. They were waiting for an explosion. She offered them paperwork. She didn't ask for territory or tribute. She proposed an exchange of knowledge. She cited specific GSA medical technologies that could help repair the damage done to the 4 civilians. Advanced tissue regeneration, neural pathway reconstruction, treatments far beyond current human capability. Her anger, and there was steel in her eyes, was not directed toward retaliation. It was channeled into a precise, practical demand for the means to heal her people. She wanted the tools to fix what had been broken, not the permission to break something in return. The GSA's aggression was met with a restraint that felt alien to the assembled delegates. Humanity had every right by any galactic standard to demand a pound of flesh. They had the moral high ground, the evidence, the overwhelming tactical advantage. They could have dictated terms. Instead, they negotiated. They faced a predator that had mauled their civilians and asked it to become a teacher. The strategic inversion was breathtaking. The council delegates exchanged looks of stunned disbelief. The Voral ambassador, a species known for its millennia-long grudges, actually leaned forward, its large eyes blinking slowly. The Creval delegation's clicking fell silent. They had presided over thousands of first contact disputes. They had never seen a wronged party respond with an offer of partnership. The anticipation in the room shifted from dread of a coming explosion to awe at a display of near unthinkable discipline. They were witnessing a new kind of power. Parker's resolution was delivered without a hint of theatrics. "We are not here to end your institution. We are here to join the community it represents. Our terms are simple. Help us heal our people, grant us the status we have earned, and we will offer our partnership in return. We believe a stronger relationship is a more lasting form of justice than a temporary punishment." The victim was not pleading for mercy from the court. They were outlining the terms of a future alliance. Their suffering had not made them weak. It had granted them a legitimacy and a negotiating position that retaliation would have instantly squandered. They turned a moment of supreme vulnerability into a platform for permanent inclusion. The GSA had created a victim. Earth had created an ambassador. The GSA delegation waited for a slap on the wrist. They expected the council to mandate new ethical review boards, perhaps a temporary suspension of their first contact privileges. They were prepared for procedural adjustments, a few public reprimands, the usual political theater that followed a minor diplomatic incident. Their legal team had drafted proposals for superficial reforms. They believed their institutional weight would absorb the impact, that their 15,000 years of precedent would buffer the consequences. They were wrong. The head of the council spoke the verdict without preamble. The words echoed in the silent chamber. Full spacefaring civilization status, granted to humanity, immediately. The GSA representatives froze. This was not a sanction. This was an ascension. The status came with everything: voting rights on the Interstellar Council, protected territorial claims under galactic law, access to the shared knowledge networks, the full diplomatic and legal recognition that most species spent centuries negotiating for. It was the keys to the kingdom, handed over in a single sentence. The next part was the financial blow. Reparations, not a fine paid to a government, but direct compensation mandated for the 4 abused civilians. The council specified the amount in galactic standard currency, a sum that would require the GSA to liquidate significant assets. The teacher, the pilot, the nurse, the student, they were no longer specimens in a report. They were plaintiffs in a successful lawsuit, and the judgment was colossal. Then came the personnel suspensions. Every GSA officer directly involved in the capture and experimentation programs was suspended indefinitely pending a full external investigation. Their security clearances were revoked. Their access to facilities was denied. The directive named Director Kazult and his senior staff explicitly. Their careers were over. The institution they had served now publicly disavowed their methods. The formal condemnation was the final symbolic nail. The council's statement described the GSA's actions as a case of arrogant expansionism, a violation of the trust that underpinned galactic law. It was a phrase that would be studied in diplomatic academies for generations. They weren't just being punished. They were being used as a cautionary tale. The requirement for a formal public apology seemed almost like an afterthought, but it carried its own unique weight. The GSA would have to stand before the entire galactic community and admit its failure, its ethical collapse. Its pride would become its humiliation. For humanity, the calculation was stunning. They had achieved in a single afternoon what took other species lifetimes of careful negotiation and technological demonstration. They skipped the line entirely. Their victim status, instead of making them a target for pity, had been leveraged into instant, unassailable political legitimacy. They weren't just members of the galactic community now. They were its newest protected class, with the full weight of law behind them and a massive financial settlement to fund their rapid advancement. The prey had been handed the rulebook, and the hunters were now the ones answering to it. Taysar had watched it all from the edges. The junior assistant linguist, lowest rank on the science team, noted for his nervous hands and a habit of double-checking data when no one was watching. He'd been the first to notice the translation matrix wasn't processing Vega's speech. He'd seen the ethical breaches in the experiment logs and filed 3 formal queries that were promptly ignored by his superiors. His career was built on observation, not action. He was a note-taker, a data corrector, a man who saw problems and reported them upward, expecting them to be solved by someone with more authority. That career ended when Commander Vega found him. Vega didn't approach the GSA directors or senior scientists. He walked past the delegation leadership and stopped in front of Tassar. The offer was delivered quietly, without ceremony. "We require a diplomatic liaison, someone who understands both systems." "Your name came up." Tassar just stared. He was a junior researcher from a minor colony world. He had no political connections, no family influence, no record of leadership. He had a file full of ignored ethical complaints and a reputation for being too cautious. The selection wasn't random. Earth's intelligence had dissected the Starseeker's crew manifest and found the one individual who consistently questioned the methods, not the goals. Tassar's file showed a pattern of uncomfortable memos about sentient rights, concerns about non-consensual procedures, and arguments for more transparent protocols. He was the sole voice of doubt in an institution deafened by its own arrogance. Humans didn't value his rank. They valued his principles. They didn't want the most powerful representative. They wanted the most trustworthy. The offer was a complete inversion of GSA hierarchy. The lowest-ranking crew member was being offered the most critical diplomatic role. Tassar's immediate superiors, men and women with centuries of experience, would now report through him. His career as a researcher was over the moment he accepted. There would be no going back to data analysis and linguistic modeling. He would become the primary point of contact between two civilizations, responsible for navigating the aftermath of a crisis he had witnessed from the front row. He looked from Vega to the stunned faces of the GSA delegation. He saw the institutional pride that had led them here. He remembered the medical scans of the 4 humans, the clear evidence of suffering his own organization had caused. His ethical discomfort, once a career liability, was now his only qualification. It was the one thing Earth needed that the GSA had discarded. His acceptance wasn't dramatic. He didn't give a speech. He simply nodded once. The transformation was instantaneous. The nervous assistant was gone. In his place stood the first diplomatic envoy of a new era. His old ident card, granting access to science labs and data archives, became obsolete. His new designation gave him clearance for interstellar communications and diplomatic negotiations. The GSA had kept him on the periphery because he asked uncomfortable questions. Earth placed him at the center for exactly the same reason. He became the bridge, the conduit for all communication, the interpreter of intent, the living proof that the new relationship would be built on different values. His first act was to forward the human medical files to the GSA's own medical division with a simple directive: prepare treatment plans. The captive had not just been freed. He had been given the keys to the house, and his first move was to start fixing the damage. The GSA believed they were handling a containment breach, a localized crisis on a single ship, a problem with one escaped specimen. Their response was tactical, immediate, focused on regaining control of the Starseeker. They never considered the scale of the operation arrayed against them. Their frame of reference was too small. Vega watched their frantic efforts from the bridge with a calm that unnerved them more than any threat display. He finally addressed Director Kazult, not with a boast but with a simple correction of perspective. The director was thinking in terms of a single mission, a single ship, a single confrontation. Vega informed him he was looking at Phase 3 of a 70-year strategic initiative. The capture wasn't an incident. It was a scheduled appointment. Humanity had known about the wider galaxy for decades. Long-range sensor arrays left over from an ancient precursor race they'd discovered and quietly studied had given them early warning. They didn't spend those years building battleships or planning conquests. They dedicated their entire scientific and industrial base to a single goal: compatibility. They reverse-engineered every energy signature, every communication protocol, every scrap of data they could gather from passive observation. Their technological tree wasn't designed for dominance. It was engineered for seamless integration with the existing galactic infrastructure. They weren't trying to build a better weapon. They were building a universal adapter. Every move the GSA made had been anticipated because humanity had studied them like a subject. Their scientific curiosity, their bureaucratic procedures, their predictable patterns of expansion, all of it was modeled and mapped. The GSA's decision to capture a human wasn't a surprise. It was the triggering condition for a pre-planned diplomatic operation. Their predator instincts, their desire to study the new and unknown, played directly into a timeline written by human strategists years earlier. They followed their own nature straight into a trap designed specifically for that nature. The scope of the preparation was staggering. Vega detailed it without emotion. Linguistic teams had achieved fluency in 14 major galactic languages. Engineering Corps had built prototype systems that could interface directly with GSA technology. Diplomatic teams had wargamed this exact scenario 100 times. The GSA wasn't facing a frightened new species. They were facing an organization that had spent generations preparing for this exact moment of contact. Their first encounter wasn't with a primitive civilization. It was with a peer that had been watching them from the shadows for longer than some of their crew had been alive. The resolution wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. Vega made it clear this confrontation was never about proving human superiority or punishing the GSA. It was about demonstration. Demonstrating their technological parity, demonstrating their strategic foresight, demonstrating their ethical framework. The goal was never conflict. The goal was forced acceleration onto the galactic stage with full membership rights, and the GSA's aggressive curiosity provided the perfect catalyst. Their predation, their belief that they were harvesting a new species for study, had been the very mechanism that made them active participants in a larger human plan. They thought they were capturing a specimen. They were actually attending their own audition for a new partnership, and they never even knew they were on stage. The GSA expected a brutal counterattack. It was the natural order. A stronger power attacks, a weaker power retaliates or is destroyed. They braced for a military response, for human warships to materialize and open fire. Their tactical projections were based on this assumption. They planned for an exchange of force, a contest of strength. They never planned for a trial. Earth never fired a shot. Their weapons remained silent. Their power was in the evidence. They used the GSA's own logs, their own medical scans, their own security footage. They built their case with the enemy's tools. Their strategy wasn't destruction. It was exposure. They didn't break the GSA's systems. They used them to prove a point. Every piece of data was a brick in a wall of undeniable fact. Their compliance with galactic law became a tactical advantage. They didn't invent new rules. They used the existing ones with perfect precision. They quoted the Sentient Rights Accords back to the Council verbatim. They followed procedural guidelines for presenting evidence to the letter. Their restraint was a demonstration of discipline. It showed they understood the system better than its creators. They fought the battle on a field of their opponent's choosing, and they won using their opponent's rulebook. Moral clarity proved to be a more potent force than any weapon. The GSA's technological superiority meant nothing against the raw, documented truth of their ethical failure. Their advanced ships and powerful energy fields were useless in a debate over right and wrong. The humans didn't need to match their firepower. They only needed to show the Council what the GSA had done. The evidence was the weapon, and it was unblockable. The GSA's leadership was completely disarmed by this approach. They were prepared for a fight. They were ready to justify military action as a necessary response to aggression. They had no response to a calm, methodical presentation of their own crimes. Their confusion was a weapon in itself. They didn't know how to process an enemy that refused to behave like an enemy. Their entire strategic doctrine was built around conflict, not conversion. The ultimate demonstration of this principle came at the very end. The GSA expected demands, ultimatums, a list of punishments. They received a request for partnership. The shift was so profound it left them mentally disoriented. They were braced for a fist to the face. They were offered a handshake. The move was so counter to all known forms of power projection that it completely bypassed their defenses. Vega explained the core of the strategy without a trace of irony. Turning enemies into friends is a more permanent solution than destroying them. It removes the problem and adds an asset. The simplicity of the statement belied its strategic depth. They hadn't just won a confrontation. They had redesigned the entire relationship. Their apparent vulnerability, being captured, being experimented on, being the victim, was not a weakness to be overcome. It was the foundation of their strength. It was the moral high ground from which they launched their entire diplomatic offensive. They took the energy of the attack against them and redirected it into building a bridge. The victim became the architect of a new alliance, and the predator found itself without a target. The Galactic Scientific Authority's confidence was built on a foundation 15,000 years thick. Their experience wasn't just a history, it was a guarantee. They believed their long timeline of spacefaring made them superior by default. They thought they had seen every possible form of civilization, every conceivable strategy. Their institutional arrogance was a suit of armor they had worn for so long. They forgot it could be pierced. That armor shattered in a span of hours. The cracks didn't just appear. They were systematically exposed. Every assumption they held about humanity proved catastrophically wrong. They assumed a technological edge. It was imaginary. Their stealth systems, their encryption, their containment fields, all of it had been mapped and neutralized years before they even knew humans were watching. Their belief in their own innovation was a comfortable lie. Their most advanced systems were already obsolete in human labs, their secrets already filed away. The edge they thought they held was nothing but a delay, and humanity had already caught up. Their ethical framework was not just flawed, it was compromised. The noble pursuit of knowledge had curdled into systematic torture, and they had documented every transgression themselves. Their own data logs became the evidence that condemned them. The rules they helped write for the galaxy were the same rules they broke. Their moral authority, a pillar of their identity, crumbled into dust under the weight of their own files. They stood not as enlightened explorers but as hypocrites who had abandoned their principles for data points. Their diplomatic position collapsed. They expected to argue from a place of strength, to leverage their long history and political connections. Instead, they were placed in the defendant's chair. Their allies on the council turned away. Their arguments sounded like excuses. Their precedents offered no protection. The legal and political capital they had spent millennia building evaporated in a single afternoon. They were no longer the respected scientific authority. They were the subject of a war crimes tribunal. Their scientific methods were rendered obsolete. Their approach to first contact, capture, study, dissect, was exposed as not just unethical but strategically naive. They treated new species like puzzles to be solved, not peers to be understood. Humanity didn't just refuse to be a puzzle. They demonstrated that the GSA's entire methodology was a vulnerability to be exploited. Their science had made them predictable. Their curiosity had made them easy to manipulate. Their greatest strength became their most critical weakness. The Council's judgment was the final blow. It wasn't a fine or a suspension. It was a mandate for a complete protocol review. Every procedure, every assumption, every standard operating method was now subject to external audit and overhaul. The institution itself was being ordered to tear itself down and rebuild from the foundation. Their age of arrogance didn't end with a bang or a slow decline. It ended with a quiet, formal directive from a council that had lost all faith in them. Human intervention didn't just stop a single mission. It forced a 15,000-year-old institution to question its very reason for existing. The GSA didn't just lose a confrontation. They lost their story about themselves. The galaxy learned humanity's true nature not through its weapons, but through its refusal to use them. Every other species that reached the stars did so by demonstrating power. They built bigger ships, developed stronger shields, and secured their status through a clear display of force. It was the established path. The GSA expected humanity to follow it. They braced for the traditional response to aggression, overwhelming retaliation. Earth did the opposite. They demonstrated principle. They achieved status by revealing the GSA's ethical failure, not by matching their technological might. They proved that an advanced civilization isn't measured by the strength of its energy fields, but by the strength of its ethical framework. Their strategy was a complete inversion of galactic norms, and it left the established powers mentally disoriented. You cannot fight an enemy that refuses to fight back on your terms. Their perceived fragility concealed an incredible strategic discipline. The GSA saw soft bodies and a lack of integrated weaponry. They missed the real armor, a profound patience and a willingness to absorb a first strike to gain a permanent moral and political advantage. Their weakness was a calculation, not an accident. They allowed themselves to be captured, to be studied, to be hurt, because it gave them the one thing brute force could never achieve: legitimate, unassailable authority. The predator became the protector. The GSA, which saw itself as the guardian of galactic knowledge, was exposed as its greatest threat. Humanity, the supposed victim, became the enforcer of the very laws the GSA had violated. They used the Predator's own strength, its technology, its records, its protocols to hold it accountable. The hunter found itself caught in a trap built from its own rules. Their captors became their students. The GSA personnel, from Director Kazolt down to the junior researchers, were forced to confront the consequences of their actions, not through punishment, but through a lesson in ethical expansion. They were shown the difference between studying a species and understanding it, between collecting data and respecting life. Humanity didn't just defeat them, they re-educated them. The ultimate irony of the victory was its completeness. The GSA's entire mission, designed to subjugate and analyze a new species, resulted in that species being granted full galactic citizenship. Their aggression created the perfect conditions for humanity's diplomatic ascension. They provided the platform, the evidence, and the motivation for the Council to act. They were the architects of their own demotion and humanity's rise. Commander Vega stood before the Council one final time. The fighting was over. The verdict was delivered. He looked at the assembled delegates, the representatives of powers that had watched the entire confrontation with stunned silence. His voice carried no hint of triumph, only the quiet certainty of a proven hypothesis. "The most powerful weapon doesn't always make ruins," he said. "Sometimes it makes friends. It just depends which one you choose to use." Their captivity, which began in a sterile lab as subjects for dissection, ended on the galactic stage as recognized citizens with full rights. The humiliation and pain they endured became the foundation of their legitimacy. They turned a moment of supreme vulnerability into a permanent political position. The GSA's attempt to make them specimens resulted in their coronation. The prey didn't just escape the trap, they took ownership of the forest. The GSA's journey ended where Vega's began, with awakened eyes recognizing a new reality. Their arrogance collapsed under the weight of their own logged transgressions. Humanity's rise demonstrates that true power lies not in domination, but in the strategic conversion of confrontation into connection. They weaponized ethics and restraint, turning captivity into legitimacy. The predator became the protector by refusing to act like one. Remember this: the most dangerous force in the galaxy might not be the one that seeks to destroy you, but the one that chooses against all expectation to become your partner.